Week 11 is upon us. We are breaking down some of the biggest trade targets in fantasy football. Comment down below, when is your guys' trade deadline? We'll probably have a couple more of these videos throughout the season. I know in some leagues I have my trade deadline this week. I think in a couple other leagues I have it either next week or the week of Thanksgiving, but definitely let us know. We're going to go through 5 trade targets that we are actively buying right now and a couple sell highs that we are, maybe shopping on our open market. So, Danny, let's not waste any time. One guy that I've been wanting to put on this list for a couple of weeks now, actually,
Same.
is Jayden Reed of the Green Bay Packers. When you look at his overall point production this year, it's been pretty solid. I mean, he's the wide receiver 12 in overall fantasy points this season, but his target share has dipped in recent weeks. The Packers were on bye last week. Chicago and San Fran are tough opponents in the short term, the next 2 weeks that they have. So maybe the Jayden Reed manager is looking at this and thinking that, maybe they should move off of him for somebody with a better playoff schedule or whatever the case is. But even after these next 2 weeks against Chicago and San Fran, the Packers have Miami, Detroit, Seattle, New Orleans, and Minnesota in the fantasy championship, which to me is a hell of a stretch run. And Jayden Reed has been explosive. He's been very, very productive when he's gotten opportunities, and Jordan Love has been playing well. And I think similar to last year, we're going to see Jordan Love play really well down the stretch going into the NFL playoffs and into the fantasy playoffs. So all of those games, like the ones I just mentioned, Miami, Detroit, Seattle, New Orleans, and Minnesota, we're going to see the Packers implied for like 25 plus points, according to Vegas. So for me, I'm buying a guy who, doesn't have the greatest peripherals, only an 18% target share on the year, sometimes not running the full allotment of routes because he's a slot receiver. I'm still buying him for the big plays and the high target upside.
Yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at as well. I think him and Zay Flowers are very similar in the sense that both are a little bit volatile, but at the end of the day, that big play nature on a good offense is why you're getting them. I would still prefer Jayden Reed. Again, that might be a hot take because Zay Flowers has been really good in the last few weeks. But I do think, like you said, once Jordan Love starts playing a little bit better football, maybe turns the ball over a little bit less, sustains some more offensive drives, this offense is going to be implied for 25 plus points. And as good as Josh Jacobs is, there's no Derrick Henry to be the engine of their offense. So again, this isn't a Zay Flowers versus Jayden Reed talk as a whole, but I do think the market as a whole right now is going to be favoring Zay Flowers when in actuality, I do still prefer Jayden Reed. And Jayden Reed's a guy that I have still ranked in my top 15 of my rest of season wide receiver rankings. And we've seen him legitimately win weeks on his own.
Yeah, and I think there's a number of guys that are, a touch or a tier behind where you would value Jayden Reed who are coming off of good performances. Can you package Chuba Hubbard plus another wide receiver to go get Jayden Reed? Can you grab Calvin Ridley, who's had 3 straight games, and use something else to go up and get Jayden Reed? Some of the trades you guys can see per our trade finder tool over on Flock Fantasy, you can see T. Higgins plus Dallas Goedert, Tank Dell plus a quarterback upgrade. This one, Marvin Harrison, DeAndre Hopkins, also another good example of somebody who's kind of on the up. You could maybe use to tier up to Jayden Reed. I just think he's a rock solid, top 15 guy who I want the spike week production from. Early in the season, we really, really saw it. We just haven't seen it because Jordan Love hasn't played as well in recent weeks. And I think that's going to adjust itself as the schedule eases up, after week 10 and week 11, or after week 11 and week 12, when it's a little bit more challenging. Week 13 onward, I think Jordan Love's going to play at a really high level.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's funny because when you look at the season holistically, it has been a lot of booms, it has been a lot of busts, but the common denominator in the booms is that when Jordan Love's playing well, Jayden Reed is the clear number 1 target on this team, even regardless. So we do want to see him get back to at least a 20+% target share like he was doing earlier in the year. But regardless, trusting talent on a good offense is always going to get you far.
Yeah, and even in the next 2 weeks, too, against San Fran and Chicago, the next 2 games, they're better against outside wide receivers anyway. So if anybody's going to struggle more, it's probably going to be Romeo Doubs, Dontavian Wicks, and Christian Watson. So that's why I like Jayden Reed. He's the most matchup proof of all these receivers. You never have to worry about him having a difficult shadow matchup, for example, because he's not going to be the one seeing that coverage.
Yeah, on top of that, you have LaFleur scheming him inside and out, using him in motion. It's tough to shadow anybody when LaFleur's the one calling the plays,
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the guy that you have as a buy here is not that type of wide receiver, but thankfully for him, he's just so good that it doesn't matter.
And hint, hint, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. You guys will know who it is if you just look in the background of my current setting right now, because you do see a Nico Collins jersey hanging in the back. Now, I'm not going to go out there and say the guy who has Nico Collins in your league is going to sell him at wide receiver 9 overall price tags or wide receiver 7 overall price tags. I understand it will be a buy that you're going to have to spend up for. He's my wide receiver 3 rest of the season, and I think you're going to probably have to pay maybe not exactly a top 5 level price, but probably within that range. And I am totally fine buying him high. Again, like I said, he is my wide receiver 3 rest of the season, and you can make the case that he could be even higher. Again, maybe you don't rank him over Jamar, but I do think him, Jamar, Justin Jefferson are the 3 wide receivers I trust the most in the fantasy football playoffs. Maybe you get him also at a little bit of a discount because he still has his week 14 bye. The guy that had Nico Collins in your league missed the last 5 games. Maybe he's 4-6, 5-5, needs point production right now and can't afford to take on that bye. I mean, I made a similar deal in our flock league. I'm 5-5. I couldn't afford to eat Malik Neighbors bye this week, so I had to go make a deal for Tyreek Hill, who we'll talk about in a second. But talking about back on Nico Collins, like if you're a bye week team right now, if you are 8-2, if you're 7-3, if you are, I don't want to say guaranteed to make the playoffs, but have a very, very good shot at making the playoffs, even despite the week 14 bye, I think Nico Collins has the opportunity to have this playoff stretch named after him. Weeks 14-17, once he is fully back in the flow of this offense, once he is making the difference, because we've seen the Texans offense, man, with Nico Collins, one of the top 5 to 8 units in the NFL. Without Nico Collins, it looks like CJ Stroud is lost back there. And I think that is credit to Nico Collins, a guy that's been over 3 yards per route run in the last 2 years, being one of the elite dynamic wide receivers in the NFL. On top of that, like I said, if you're able to make the fantasy football championship, he plays the Baltimore Ravens, who just allowed Jamar Chase to score nearly 100 PPR points in 2 games.
Yeah, no, the schedule is very favorable, minus the bye. I mean, he does have his bye week still coming up in week 14, and that's precisely why, you'd be buying Nico Collins, is because presumably the person who has Nico Collins maybe not in the best position right now because they haven't had him for the last 5 games. They might be on the ropes, 4-6 or, something like that. And they need wins right now. And they might look ahead and still notice that Nico still has his bye week yet to come. He has the Tennessee Titans 2 weeks from now, which is a little bit of a tougher wide receiver matchup. But I mean, the Cowboys this week should be his get right spot. Jacksonville in week 13 should be a monster game for him. And then just think of the over-unders of these games, weeks 15-17. You got the Miami Dolphins, the Kansas City Chiefs, and the Baltimore Ravens, like you said, the single easiest matchup for a fantasy wide receiver in week 17, which when we fast forward to our week 17 rankings, Nico Collins will probably be wide receiver 1 overall in our rankings.
Yeah. And I mean, that's going to be a big spoiler, but hey, week 17, once you guys are seeing that wide receiver tier list, you're looking at nobody other than number 12 being at the top.
Yeah, exactly. So again, we're trying to trade for league winners this time of year. If you're still watching fantasy content, you're presumably in a good winning position right now. So that's why we're talking about guys that can make a huge, huge difference for you down the stretch. And the trade finder on our site would indicate that there is some value to be had on Nico Collins. You said, oh, maybe people aren't treating him as like a top 9 receiver. I think that there's definitely leagues out there that he is being treated as a top 12 receiver instead of a top 5 receiver or whatever. Like Cortland Sutton and DK Metcalf being traded for Nico is an easy trade. I mean, Khalil Shakir, that's just straight collusion. But Mike Evans, Jordan Love, this one here, if you needed to tear down from Jefferson to get another wide receiver help there, Darnell Mooney and Nico Collins makes some sense because I don't think Nico versus Jefferson is a huge, huge difference. No. And yeah, there's trades out there that you can make. Again, a number of guys that we're going to talk about throughout this video, guys who are coming off of big weeks, package Chuba Hubbard, Kareem Hunt, Calvin Ridley, Cedric Tillman, guys like this. Maybe you have to package them plus another stable asset that people believe in, like a Jahmyr Gibbs or like a James Cook or something like that. You go James Cook, Cedric Tillman. How close does that get you to Nico Collins? I think there's going to be teams out there desperate for wins, desperate for, a playoff push that are going to be maybe looking at a guy who still has his week 14 bye, who's coming off of a major injury, who want to move off of him. And I think that's the psychology that you need to play into with Nico.
It's a lot harder to get Nico Collins off the Nico Collins owner when they're watching Nico Collins every single week absolutely dominate secondaries. The time to buy them is when they haven't seen Nico Collins play football in 5 weeks.
Yeah, no, and literally the last time we saw this guy, he was scoring like a 75-yard touchdown. That was like the last time we saw him on the field, and it was a long time ago. Like, we have short memories in fantasy football. Like, 2 weeks ago, does anybody remember who the highest scoring players were? Like, that's how quick the memory fades in fantasy, and it's sometimes just an out of sight, out of mind thing. And also, too, the Houston Texans offense has not looked good in the meantime, too, which maybe speaks to how important Nico is. Maybe that makes them even a little bit more bullish on Nico, but some teams are just going to look at it and be like, you know what, the offense isn't what we thought it was. Also, too, like the splits that we have of Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs was on the field for. Like, we don't have any split of Nico without Diggs on the field this year.
Dude, maybe this sounds a little hyperbolic to those watching, but with Stephon Diggs out, a guy that was averaging 8 to 10 targets per game, even with Nico on the field. Like, if you told me in the playoff weeks, the final 4 weeks, weeks 14, he has a bye. So weeks 15 to 17, he averaged 25 plus points per game. Why can't he?
Yeah, exactly. This is why we're talking about league winners for a reason. Like, how many guys are seriously going to outscore Nico Collins? He could be like the, skeleton key to unlock, Best Ball Mania 5
Let's hope so.
drafts and, playoff runs, because me and Danny have bags upon bags of Nico Collins, hopefully that we're able to advance to that point. But speaking of, some homerism here, Danny went with kind of a homer pick there on Nico Collins, the guy behind him. I'm going to go with kind of a homer pick here of Mike Evans, and honestly, just the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in general. But Mike Evans specifically is the one that I'm buying. And it's for a couple of reasons. For starters, they are on bye this week. So the perfect time to buy Mike Evans, Baker Mayfield, the running backs, Kate Otten, whoever you're looking to buy on this offense, but particularly Mike Evans, is because this offense is not playing games, and they have the easiest schedule I've ever seen in my life to be at the end of the season. And similar to what we just said about Collins, we have no split of Mike Evans not having Chris Godwin on the field, not only this year, but also in the entire Baker Mayfield tenure. The Buccaneers desperately needed this week to get healthier on the offensive and defensive side of the football. I think come week 12, when they played the New York Giants, coming off of the bye, we're going to see a much more healthy team, a much better team, because they're trotting out there human beings by the names of Ryan Miller, Raheem Jarrett. Like, these were our starting receivers, and we're still moving the football. We're still scoring, 20 points against the 49ers. We're still bringing the Kansas City Chiefs to overtime. Baker
Mayfield,
Mayfield
Liam Cohn.
And Tristan Wirfs missed half the game last week with an MCL sprain. It doesn't sound like he's going to be out for a very long period of time. Again, this is the schedule for Mike Evans. And also, just keep in mind, some of these teams Mike Evans is part owner of: Giants, Panthers, Raiders, Chargers, Cowboys, and Panthers again in week 17. Again, we're talking players who are going to be ranked high in our week 17 rankings. How high will Mike Evans rank against the Carolina Panthers? We've seen him post a monster week in week 17 against the Panthers just 2 years ago, when he helped win a lot of people a lot of money over in Best Ball Mania drafts. All of those defenses are exploitable. The Bucs are likely to win a lot of those games. And we saw this last year too with Tampa Bay. They had a very tough games during the mid-season stretch there. Atlanta, Baltimore, Kansas City, and San Fran have been our last 4 games. That is the team that leads our division, probably the best team in the NFL, in the Baltimore Ravens, and the 2 teams in the Super Bowl last year with Kansas City and San Francisco. Then we turned it on down the stretch last year, and we made the playoffs, and then eventually beat the Eagles, made the divisional round, made it close against the Lions. I think we're going to see a very similar trajectory to this schedule.
Yeah, I completely agree. And in fact, this sounds funny because obviously I was eating 2 bad games, or not bad games, but 2 non-Mike Evans weeks in a row. But contextually, after the Thursday night football game where Jamar Chase went off, I played against him in my home league. I realized, I'm like, okay, I really like George Pickens. And I still think George Pickens, you can make the case for being like a top 15-ish level receiver rest of the season. But I'm like, okay, well, I'm already going to lose this week more than likely because I just faced off against Jamar Chase and I had like 15% win equity. So I chalked up this week. I'm like, okay, what's more advantageous for me in the position of my league? In a league that 6-4 versus 4-6 is separated between 1st and 11th in this league right now. What's more advantageous for me? Missing 1 week of Mike Evans and getting back to that schedule in the last 3 games when I genuinely think I can win all those games based off my team scaling up: Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, Malik Neighbors, Mike Evans, Jahmyr Gibbs, all on that team. Or having 1 extra week with George Pickens, but not having a strong final push team. So to me, again, I sent Pickens for Evans straight up. You can make the case because I don't have the greatest record. Maybe that wasn't the greatest idea. But to me, when the weeks that matter at the end of the year, those last 3 games, I don't think any team can beat me in the league.
You get absolutely nothing for being the best record in your league right now in week 11. If you are a 8-2 or an 8-2 team or a 7-3 team right now, you win nothing. If you get bounced first round of the playoffs, or at least in the league formats that I play in, you win nothing. So for me, you got to be thinking about, how can I make my team go from a really good or potentially great or potentially elite to, I need the stars to align to win a championship, because it doesn't always go to the championship team that has all of the best players in our rest of season rankings. Sometimes it just goes to the right good players who have great schedules and the stars aligning for them.
I know this all too well. I mean, in one of my leagues, so I've mentioned the Box Munchers League to you personally a lot of times, but in that league, dude, I don't think so. That league's been running for 6 or 7 years, I believe. It started when I was in high school, about grade 10, grade 11. I don't think a single top 2 seed has won the championship in that league. And in fact, in the time since we've been on Sleeper, not a single bye week team has made the championship.
Yeah, well, in my home league, both of the championships I won, I was the 4 seed in both of them. So I was not the 1 or the 2 seed. I actually had to beat the 1 seed in both cases in round 2 to make the championship and win the league. So sometimes it's just about having the guys who have things aligned for them. Again, we're not talking you have good players, but they're maybe not the guys that are ranked number one in the rest of season rankings or project the best or whatever. And that sometimes factors in. So speaking of that, there's a guy that is, really down in the fantasy community right now that you're buying. I'm a little bit more hesitant than you because we both actually had an opportunity to buy this player from the same person in the Flock League this week. And you ended up pulling the trigger and I ended up not pulling the trigger. So I'll let you make the case for Tyreek as a buy.
Well, there's context to everything for you in the deal that you were acquiring specifically. You would have been stuck with some bye weeks and you're in a position where you just can't accept them. And actually, I'm in the inverse where I got rid of a bye week, although maybe I lost in terms of face value. Again, the context of that deal, you're going to see it all in the Flock League. I'm sure people are going to make, reaction clips. Oh my God, this and that. At the end of the day, I'm a 5-5 team in that league. I'm getting Nico Collins back, but I do have Malik Neighbors on bye this week. I'm playing against a team that is currently one spot ahead of me in the playoff picture, and I get Tyreek Hill now, who doesn't have a bye for the rest of the season. I'm in must-win territory. In that league, dude, you drop 2 games rest of the season in my spot, you're probably not making the playoffs. So for me, although I would slightly prefer Malik Neighbors rest of the season, I still think if you're in a position where you can't afford a Malik Neighbors bye week and you have to go buy Tyreek Hill and maybe downgrade the asset a little bit, I'm perfectly fine with it. Especially, again, 5-5 context, you need to take a home run swing. Not many better home run swings than the guy that can literally be, we saw last year on the MVP ballot. I understand the overall stink on Tyreek now, whether it's due to the risk, whether it's due to the overall production with Tua. I understand that there are levels of concern for Tyreek Hill, and that's why I think it makes him an extremely appealing trade target. I don't think in your leagues you'll have to pay a Malik Neighbors level asset. I had to in this league because, again, it's a sharper league. People know Tyreek Hill, what the ceiling represents. I think in your leagues, like you said, Cedric Tillman plus Chuba Hubbard plus throw a piece in here regardless. Let's talk about Tyreek Hill, though. The reason why I'm bringing this up is our good friend Ron Stewart. And again, we actually talked about this a little bit in the DMs as well in our group chat. I'm sure you actually saw that this morning. But he actually brought up, is Tyreek Hill a top 12 wide receiver rest of the season? And I thought that was blasphemous to me because he's been a low-end wide receiver 1 in the 4 games that Tua has played. And that's in a Dolphins offense that simply hasn't lacked or had their identity in these last few weeks. With Tyreek Hill, he's averaged 15.73 points per game in the games Tua Tagovailoa has played. And I get it. That's nowhere where we expected him to be coming into the year. We thought he'd be a 22, 23 plus point per game scorer. But at the end of the day, if I'm going to have a risky buy, I'm going to do it on the guy that can flat out be the best overall player at his position. It's risky. He has the risk. Maybe Tua goes down. Who knows? But if you're 5-5, you're 4-6, you're 6-4, you're in the middle of your playoff hunt, and you need that piece to unlock the ceiling of your team, I'm perfectly fine risking it for Tyreek Hill.
So I agree in premise that Tyreek, he's probably a future Hall of Famer, maybe a future first ballot Hall of Famer easily in terms of the talent that he possesses. But here's where I disagree on the premise of buying Tyreek Hill. Number one, the fantasy docs that I follow seem very concerned about his injury. So there's that. I looked into this because I was also trying to buy Tyreek Hill. So I really looked into how injured is he? Do we have to be worried about it? So on and so forth. What most people said was you should be selling your Tyreek Hill shares, basically. And that's obviously not that concerning for me because I think a lot of them were factoring in his production as well. So again, production-wise, I kind of agree with you. He has the chance to turn it on down the stretch. But I am worried that they were saying sell him from the injury standpoint. And the other thing that I think paints a easier picture than it's actually been is the fact that Tyreek Hill has one game that Tua Tagovailoa has started where he's been over a 25% target share. It was week 1. He had 26 PPR points in week 1. He had 6.6 points in week 2. Again, Tua didn't finish the game, but 12 points in week 9 and 11.7 in week 10. So yes, he's averaged 16 points or whatever over that stretch, but he had one good game.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that premise, but I also think the 3 games after significant concussion issues, I just think we're going to see a better Tua going forward, and I think we're going to see a better game plan around Tua going forward. That's kind of my thing with it. I feel like these first few weeks, coming off a major concussion, we're not going to see the full nature of this offense because Tua Tagovailoa simply hasn't gotten the reps.
Yeah, and again, if you can get him for wide receiver 2, even maybe wide receiver 3 price tags in some leagues, that's fine.
That's
you paid a wide receiver 1 price tag in my
I don't disagree.
Neighbors. And I think, again, the bye week and all that stuff, it's a huge factor because it was a factor for me as well. Yeah. But I'm much more likely to do Cedric Tillman and Calvin Ridley for Tyreek Hill type of deals than I would be, giving
those are seldom available
wide receiver 1 like Malik Neighbors.
I get that. You need a fish to accept your Cedric Tillman and Calvin Ridley for Tyreek Hill.
Well, that's what I had on the table for Zach.
Well, the fact that you didn't accept that is crazy to me then.
Like I said, the reason I couldn't accept it, the deal that I had on the table for Zach, for those of you guys, well, I'll probably talk about it during the
Yeah.
Flock League vlog. He wanted to do a Kelsey for McBride swap. So basically a negligible difference, but McBride is on bye this week. So that factored in for me, which is why it's also not the best deal for me to make. He was going to give me Tyreek and Jalen McMillan, who's also on bye this week, for Cedric Tillman and Calvin Ridley if we did the tight end swap in addition to that. And he also said he would throw in Tucker Kraft, who I can use this week in Trey McBride's bye as well. Again, you could definitely look at me and think I'm absolutely nuts. Dude. If I heard fantasy docs saying that they weren't worried about Tyreek's injury, I would have accepted that deal in a heartbeat.
I'm just sure Zach wouldn't have offered it, dude.
No, exactly. And that, again, it doesn't solve my primary problem, was the only reason I didn't make the trade, which is I have no RB2 on my team. And also I lose a depth wide receiver, and I have bye weeks for Khalil Shakir coming up and a number of other guys that I need that depth for. If I'm going to be weak at RB2, I need that depth at wide receiver. And also I lose a guy like Khalil Shakir, or I lose a guy like Tillman and Ridley. That's one less piece I can use to trade for a running back. So again, I'm also 4-6. You could make the argument, just swing for the fences, go for the win, try and get yourself into the playoff picture. I could have done it. Again, I went back and forth this morning on whether or not I would do it. The ultimate main reason I didn't is because it didn't solve my original problem. And I'm also in talks today about something that will solve my original problem. And it involves Kelsey. So I might need him to do that deal.
I think if it Ridley and Tillman for Tyreek Hill, thank you. You didn't do that because I got Tyreek Hill.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that in the Flock League vlog again. Maybe you guys think I'm a fish for not making that deal, but
I'll be honest with you, bro. That is wild.
Again, I'm worried enough about the health stuff. I also have Achane too, so I have a lot of investment in the Dolphins offense to begin with. But anyways, let's talk about an offense and a team and a player that we both have a lot of investment in. So this is a little bag defendy, but Breece Hall to me is just, he's a combined buy for both of us. We're both actively buying where we can. The Jets are bad. They're an utter train wreck. You don't want to attach yourself to this situation. However, Breece is still commanding targets at an elite level. Anytime a guy with an RB1 utilization profile, a top 5 utilization profile in terms of, utilization score per fantasy life, has 3 down games in a row, which is what he's had, it's time to send offers, because last time this happened, we were telling you to send offers. Breece has 1 minus matchup the rest of the season versus the Rams in week 16. But other than that, it's the Colts, bye week, Seattle, Miami, Jacksonville, and Buffalo in week 17 when it matters most. So all bottom 12 run defenses. Again, the rush attempts have dipped a little bit. We're frustrated with how they're using them. We're frustrated with this. We're frustrated with that. But to me, it just all points to the fact that Breece Hall is a good buy for those of you guys who, again, are in winning positions looking for late season upside. I think Breece Hall could very well be a top 5, top 3 scoring running back, week 13 onward after his bye.
Yeah, I mean, depending on, obviously this depends on what the coaching staff for the Jets wants to do, because I don't know, maybe it's just me, but when the best player in your offense is touching the ball 14 times, there's an issue there. Breece Hall in his last 5 games has been over 4.9 yards per carry in 4 of them. So it's not like he's playing bad. It's that he just simply hasn't gotten the 15, 18, 20 carries that he was getting earlier in the year. And I think personally, once the Jets coaching staff, specifically you mentioned the week 12 bye, if he has another good game against Indy and they lose because they gave him the ball 18 times and he was efficient, but they didn't keep giving it to him, you don't think on the week 12 bye they're going to realize, oh, maybe we should start giving the ball to 20 a little bit more?
Yeah. The bye weeks definitely could be a reflection piece for them. I mean, they're not out of it. Like, I know it looks pretty bleak for the Jets right now. They're probably out of it realistically, but if they win against Indianapolis and they have a bye week and they can convince themselves, hey, we could win some games here and we have a good performance going into the bye or whatever, it's not like they're not going to try and win games. They're professional athletes. They're going to try and win games, and Breece Hall gives them the best chance to win, at least on the ground. I think they're going to make that adjustment after the bye if they don't already do it in week 11.
Yeah, and the other piece of context too is they are on to an interim coach. They're going to want to fight for the rest of the season for him. Again, Jeff Ulbrich is their DC. I'm assuming he's probably going to be back on the squad as the defense coordinator next year, but he is the interim coach, and we've seen it all the time. I mean, look at the Las Vegas Raiders last year. Even when they were out of contention, when you have an interim coach, guys just fight for that guy.
Yeah, that's a couple assumptions. I'm not going to go as far as to say that he's going to be back with the team and they want to fight for him. The vibes are pretty fucking bad. I'm not going to lie. Like, the vibes are really bad in New York right now. But
I'm trying to coach.
Let me just put it this way: is Breece Hall going to have sub 12 PPR points for 3 games in a row the rest of the season? No, and that's why I'm buying.
Yeah, I mean, we saw it against Buffalo and against Pittsburgh that he scored over 20 points, and everybody's like, "Yo, Breece Hall's back. He's RB1 rest of the
Yeah.
season," and then he has a few bad games, and people are like, "No, he's useless."
Yeah, exactly. That's why we're buying him, because people are talking about him being like an RB2 for the rest of the year. And I just don't think that's the case. So I mentioned this guy like probably 3 or 4 times throughout the video, but my sell high is Cedric Tillman. And if you're wondering if I'm bag defending right now, I literally have Cedric Tillman. So this is how I know he's a sell high, because I have him. And I actually did sell him high last week in my home league. And I'm trying to sell him in the flock league right now. He has yet to have a bad game. The reason I'm trying to sell him high right now is that illusion that he's elite and he's never had a bad game. It sticks in people's minds. Everybody looks at his recent game logs. They know when Amari Cooper was traded and they go, oh, he's been elite in every single game that Amari Cooper hasn't been out there. But he has the Pittsburgh Steelers twice over the next 4 games. He has the Denver Broncos. He has the Kansas City Chiefs. That's Joey Porter, Patrick Surtain, and the Chiefs secondary that he's got to deal with 4 of his next 5. Excellent usage, but does it taper off at some point is the thing I'm worried about, because did anybody think Cedric Tillman was great coming into the season? Definitely not. Again, he could prove me wrong, taking a big step in his second year, just having a great breakout season, but color me skeptical that he's going to just be like a top 15 receiver every single week.
Yeah, no, I feel you on this. Again, my caveat here is I'm only selling Cedric Tillman if I'm going for a tier up. Like, again, I doubt you're going to be able to get some big fish, but if you can try to package Cedric Tillman plus like Chuba Hubbard and go out there and get a big time dog, I'm cool with that. If you're selling Cedric Tillman for like another wide receiver 3 projection or a low end RB2, high end RB3 type of projection, just keep the guy that has been over a 20+% target share since Amari Cooper got traded.
Again, like some of the trades we have as an example here is Cedric Tillman and Cade Otton for George Pickens, Cedric Tillman and David Montgomery for Breece Hall plus, Cedric Tillman for Tyrone Tracy, Cedric Tillman. If you can get up to a Tyreek Hill using Cedric Tillman, like we just talked about, those trades make sense. And I think they're very possible to make. Like, because there's a reason that Zach was interested in Tillman in the first place, right? Everybody has this opinion of Cedric Tillman right now that he's been elite in all 3 games that he's been capable of being elite in.
When people see that stretch, obviously going in, like we said, to the bye week, there's a very real possibility they paint the picture that that's exactly what he's going to be. And while I am optimistic on Tillman, I think he is a good player. I think he can continue being like a wide receiver 3. He's been a wide receiver 1.
Yeah, exactly. And I have him in wide receiver 3 range, and I like him. I know that people are thinking he's going to be better than he is, because I've seen like respected fantasy analysts tweet out stuff like he might be a top 24 or top 20 receiver rest of the season. I'm like,
yeah.
I feel like you have to sit down and rank all 24 receivers to be able to say something like that. And you can
say that all the time.
You know what I mean? Like, you can just say, oh, Cedric Tillman's he's a top 24 receiver all season. It's like, dude, like my wide receiver 24 is like Tank Dell. Like, is he better than Tank Dell rest of season? Or, guys like that?
Comparable. I think they're comparable.
Yeah, but like, even further up, there's guys like Devontae Adams or whatever. Is he better than Devontae Adams rest of the season?
No. And I mean, the other factor too, to that point that you said, it's like when somebody says, yeah, he's a top 5 running back this week. And then it's like, well, name the top 5 running backs then, because there's like 9 or 10 guys that can figure into that range.
Yeah, no, exactly. So, Danny, who is your sell? And then we can probably get out of here. We talked about both of these guys already, but they just had their buys. So we're kind of talking about them again.
This is very simple. Jackson Smith-Njigba, wide receiver for the Seattle Seahawks. The last time we saw this guy on the football field, he scored 37 PPR points and was the wide receiver 1 overall on that slate. In the 7 games with DK Metcalf, which I think is more indicative of how they want to use him in this offense, the player that JSN is with DK on the field, 10.8 PPR points per game, 21% target share. In those 2 games without DK Metcalf, like I said, it is skewed a little bit because he did have that one blow-up week. However, 24.9 PPR points per game, a 33% target share in those 2 games. Point blank simple, I think he's going to regress back down to that weeks 1 to 7 range because DK Metcalf is coming back.
Yeah, it's a pretty easy cut and dry thing there. Like, I mean, you could see some of the trades, JSN and Kareem Hunt for Nico. Again, if you can get anywhere close to Nico using JSN, you got to do it. This trade down here is a little bit closer. You got CMC and JSN for Achane and Deebo Samuel. I think Deebo's definitely a definitive upgrade over JSN, more so than McCaffrey is over Achane. So I think that's kind of the trades that we'd be looking to do with JSN. And I have JSN in my home league. I'm definitely sending out some offers this week to try and tier up. And I think you guys should be doing the same if you have JSN. It's great that he had a great performance. It's great that he's maybe taken a step as a player, and he's probably going to be slightly better projection than we thought he was going to be going forward. But anytime that's the case and people are starting to overreact to it, that's when we're shopping players. So we talked a lot of trades on this video here. We talked about some buys. We talked about some sells. Any honorable mention sells that you want to quickly shout out? I mean, I mentioned Calvin Ridley's had a couple good games in a row, but he does have a really good schedule. So I kind of lean towards keeping him. Any other guys that you like?
Yeah, like I was going to ask you, I'm like, who should we make a combined sell this week? Because it felt like we can't just throw Najee Harris back on here again. We already talked about that whole case the last time we did this. I mean, you can make the case like Ramondre doesn't have the greatest schedule. DeAndre Swift doesn't have the greatest schedule. And it's funny because I'm just talking about Mason running backs at this point, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go against the grain a little bit with someone that we both really like, but I do think we could look back and think, hey, maybe that was a peak time to sell them, is Chase Brown, because of Khalil Herbert maybe working into the backfield a little bit more. They also worked out Leonard Fournette randomly, which I thought was weird. It may be indicative that they don't want to use him in the way that they used him the last couple of games, and he's had like some monster performances. So
I will say,
it wouldn't shock me if I think he was like a little bit lower down the totem pole.
I will say, though, the one time we saw Khalil Herbert on the field on the Thursday game, he fumbled, and Chase Brown got 100% of the RB touches because I guess that fumble got attributed to Joe Burrow.
Yeah, no, that is a strange thing. But I'm just saying, if you could use Chase Brown to tier up, like how close does Chase Brown get you to Breece Hall right now?
I have both these guys in the flock league. I don't know.
Like given the performance of them in recent games, how close does Chase Brown get you? Like, I think that's a reasonable discussion to have because in casual leagues, people might actually prefer Chase Brown.
Yeah. And again, like you could make the case that Chase Brown actually just like goes off top 12, top 8 running back rest of the season. But at the same time, we know what Breece Hall represents, and it's less of a projection because, like you said, if Herbert or I mean, they're talking about working out Fournette. I don't think Fournette's going to be crazy involved in this team, but could he take third down snaps from Chase Brown because he's a pass blocker?
Yeah, no, it's just the very fact that they're doing those actions. They traded for a running back. They're working at a running back that maybe tells you this Chase Brown workload is unsustainable. And also Breece Hall
100% is unsustainable.
It is. And Breece Hall has a better schedule and so on and so forth. So we gave you a bunch of trade targets. If you guys do have any questions, any trades that are on the table for you, of course, you can ask us trade questions over on the site. You can go to flockfantasy.com and hit the expert or personal advice product there, and you can ask us a trade question. You can also use our trade calculator. If you are a site subscriber, you can get my opinion, you can get Danny's opinion. Our rest of season rankings are always up to date there. If you want to plug in, Breece Hall versus Chase Brown and Cedric Tillman, you can see what we would actually do in that situation. So definitely check that out. All that is linked down below on flockfantasy.com. Promo code FSE for subscription packages. You get 30% off. You also get bonus discounts as well on start sit, trade questions, a la carte purchases if you are a site subscriber. So definitely check all that stuff out. We actually did launch a video on the site yesterday. Site exclusive video. Me and Danny just sat down and talked about the 2025 class, had the important conversations. How many first round quarterbacks are we going to get? What does the mid to late first round of Dynasty Superflex drafts look like? So if you're Dynasty players, definitely that was an interesting conversation. And as always, leave a like if you guys enjoyed. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. Comment any of your thoughts down below. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.